if you're talking about certifying in the public safety space, with which most of our clients are, we sort of like to specialize in public safety, whether it's trades or regulation. You're talking about some dire consequences if some people get certified who should not be certified, who don't have the knowledge.
Hello and welcome to the It Depends podcast, your alternative guide to the often mystifying world of psychometrics. In each episode, your hosts, myself, Tim Burnett, and the brilliant Dr. Amanda Danis will serve you a cocktail of psychometric wisdom garnished with a twist of sarcasm and humour. Our mission, to help you actually enjoy the process of building better tests. So grab your favourite beverage and get ready to dive into the awesome world of psychometrics. Hello and welcome to the It Depends podcast. My name is Tim Burnett and I'm joined today again by Amanda Danis. Hello, Amanda.
Good morning, Tim. How are you?
I'm fine. Now, you're feeling a little bit under the weather, aren't you, today?
I have a little bit of a summer cold, so my voice is a little bit odd, and I'm hoping not to cough too much. But I tried to get out of recording it today, and you said I had to do it, so here I am.
No, I said if you're up for it, you've got the energy, you've got the passion. Nobody cares about a little bit of a snivel. Have you got
basically
the energy and
just guilting me into it. Basically,
never.
Nice.
I would never do that. So last time we talked about job task analysis, and just after we'd hit the stop button on the record, there was something that you felt as though you needed to kind of get across and kind of clarify, and that was about observation and the role of that within the process. Do you want to just tell us and remind us about observation in the JTA process?
Yeah, just real quick as a backup, as soon as we hung up, I thought, I really should have talked about it. And we have just done it actually for a new client. A lot of times, depending on the job role and kind of the intensity, or if there's public safety involved, or if there's a lot of physicality going on in the job role itself, a lot of times the psychometricians or their team will want to do some job observation. So they want to be able to make sure that they are getting a good grasp of what the job is so that they can speak somewhat smartly about it while they're doing the workshop, and they're not just, totally dumb about the situation. So we just did that for the board of pilotage in Washington State, and we got to go out on a pilot boat. We got to go up on a grain ship. We got to go down the pilot ladder.
These are the guys who go out and kind of in the small boats and help the big ships come into port. Is that right?
They hop onto the big ships and drive the big ships into port. So it's a really, really, really cool job. And it's like the coolest thing that I've worked on in a long time. And I really like it. No offense to my other clients. All of them are cool. But it was really fun to do that. And so by doing that observation, we were able to come up with our own list of things as third-party objective from the outside looking in. And then by the time we got to the workshop with the SMEs, it really helped us to be able to say, well, what about this? We saw this happen. Is that normal? Does that normally happen? And so that observation piece can also be really, really important. And I just totally forgot about it because you don't do it all the time. Yeah. It just depends on what industry you're in. So, but it is really helpful. So I just needed to say that.
No, it's fine. And because especially when you come into something, as a psychometrician, you're kind of working from different field to field, and you're not a specialist in the subject that you're helping the organization.
No, but everybody always thinks that I am. They're like, so you're helping them write a test about, chimney sweeps. So does that mean that you are a chimney sweep? Can you sweep
my chimney?
Can you do a bunch of these? And I'm like, I know we always joke, we know very little about a lot of different really cool jobs. And it's great. We get to learn about things that we didn't even know existed. But yeah, we are certainly not subject experts. And so the observation can really help with that.
So the next time you're on a cruise ship and they put a call out to say, can anyone steer this ship?
I will go up to the bridge and I will use all the right terms because I've learned a lot of the terms and a lot of the acronyms, and I'll make it sound really good. And then I will run aground. So it'll be fine.
I'd be too dangerous because I'd just go up there with the Titanic in mind and I'd be shouting, hard to starboard, close all watertight doors. Excellent. Well, that's good. So observation, obviously a very important part. And it might be that we kind of unpack that a little bit further in future episodes. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about cut scores. So Amanda, should the cut score be 70?
Well, Tim, it depends. It can be 70, and I think a lot of people like it to be 70. Inevitably, when we take on a new client and they've never done a cut score study or a passing score study or standard setting, it's called a bunch of different things, of course, because we like to confuse everybody. Um, and we say, oh, okay, so what's your cut score? And they say 70. And we say, how did you set that? And they said, the board set it back in 1982 or 2002 or whatever. And nobody's ever looked at it again. And since then, they've released a bunch of different test forms. They've changed the test questions or whatever. Yeah. And I think people pick that 70 because it comes from being in school, at least in the States, A, B, and C, your grades, a C or above is 70 and up. And that's usually generally considered passing. So D is like, you kind of passed, but you might have to retake it. And F is obviously you failed it. So I think that's why people just choose 70. But it should not always just be set to be 70. It's very, very dangerous.
So what is someone who's not encountered the cut score before, has heard the term, but maybe not really kind of figured out where it is in the process? Just tell me a bit more about cut scores. What are they and what are they used for?
Yeah, so they're used specifically for criterion-referenced tests. So there's generally two types of tests. Generally, there's some exceptions. Yep. There's criterion-referenced, where the candidate or the test taker is judged, their score is judged based on relative to the content of the test. How much of the content do they know? And then there's a norm-referenced test where they are judged relative to other people who have taken the test. So they might, if you have 100 people taking a norm reference test and you know you're going to take the top third because that's how much space you have in that class or in that training program or in that job role or whatever, you're judged against the people who you're taking it with. But a criterion reference test is just literally, doesn't matter how the person next to you does. It just matters how much of the content that you know. So with a criterion reference test, you have to develop that cut score. What is the pass fail decision? And it's an important decision because you're categorizing that continuous variable, which is a really crappy thing to do, as we all know. I'm sure everybody just talks about it over breakfast. But it's, a person with a 71 and a person in a 69, they get a different decision made about them. But a person with a 71 and a 99 get the same decision made about them. So in reality, that cut score is really, really important. And you have to be able to defend how you came up with it. And it has to be relative to the content of the test.
Okay. And so what's the process then for reaching that cut score? How do you go through that process?
Yeah. So again, you use subject matter experts. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think by far the most popular or most common way to do it, especially in certification and licensure, and even in other psychometric fields, is to use your subject matter experts. And they might do what's called an Angoff method or a modified Angoff method. And they basically review the test questions and they estimate, let's say out of 100 test takers, how many test takers who are minimally competent to do the job, because it's that baseline, right? It's that base standard. How many of those people they think will get the item correct. So if they say 30, the item is really hard. They only think 30% of the people are going to get it right. If they say 96, they think that 96% of the people are going to get right. And then at the end, we do some calculations, we do some averages, we look at inter-rater and intra-rater reliability, make sure everybody has agreement on the questions. Lots of times there's discrepancies in that. We have to go back to the group and say, hey, some of you thought this question was really easy. Some of you thought it was really hard. Let's talk about why we have a difference of opinion here and make sure the item is still okay. There's nothing wrong with it. And then we come up with a recommended cut score. And usually the panel will then say, okay, that feels good, right? They've seen the test form. They can say that overall, I think that sounds like it's a good cut score. And like I said, there are different methods of doing it. There's a bookmark method, there's Hofstee, you could just use, if you're being able to pilot your items, you can use operational data, but then you're losing a little bit of that expert opinion on where that standard is set. for the industry, for that certification or for that exam? Where's that
Why?
bar going to be set?
Why do you lose that? Why do you lose that expert opinion? Is that because
if you don't use the SMEs at all, if you're able to pilot your items, let's say you're able to give a 100-item test and 100 questions count towards the score, but you're able to give 15 questions that are just brand new and you're just piloting them, collecting practice data on them, you get those back. And if you use that data to set your cut score, then the problem that you have is that then what if your population is off the mark? So you're basing it on the sample that's taking the test. What if trainings have changed? What if the industry has changed? What if something has changed out there in the population, but you still need to make sure that the bar that's set for your certification, your license, your exam, that cut score still has to be where the program wants it to be, the scheme wants it to be, the committee wants it to be setting for that industry. Maybe it's going to be higher, maybe it's going to be lower. So that's where the Angoff method really comes into play. And you can use that data that you collect. If you're piloting data, you can use it to support, your Angoff method. That's what we like to do. And just kind of as checks and balances, like, okay, you guys are pretty on par, or this is happening. Why do we think this is, if there's a big difference?
Yeah.
But it's a hot debate in the psychometric world about using equating for standard setting versus using Angoff for standard setting for equivalent forms. And if any psychometrician is listening to this right now, they're in one camp or the other usually. But I'm a firm believer in Angoff standard setting.
So you're Angoff. Why would someone be so passionate about the equating? Is it equating? Was it equating?
Equating, because you're worrying about equivalent forms, and so you want the test to be fair across all people that take it. So when you release a new test with new items in it, you can equate using that pilot data if you're able to get it. And but the problem for me is that you're basing it on the sample that's taken that pilot data. You're not basing it anymore on necessarily that industry standard that's trying to be set by the certification program. So I think they can be used together. We're diving deep here.
No, that's fine. I suppose. Okay. I think what would be useful to understand is why would they try and defend that process? Why would they?
Because
it's a Angoff.
Pain in the tush, pain in the bum, if you will, to reconvene a panel of SMEs and get them to do an Angoff every time that you want to release a new form. It's a lot of work. But on the other hand, there's a lot of programs that don't have the capability or they don't have the sample size to pilot items. So they don't really have that capability to collect that data. So it's a really good, it depends situation, because it depends on your resources. It depends on how large your sample size is. It depends on how large your item bank is. Do you even have extra items to pilot? It depends on your test security situation. Lots of different. Sorry, I have a foster kitten and she's on my desk wreaking havoc. So there's a lot of it depends there. But at the end of the day, you have to have a process that is justified to set that cut score. Otherwise, you're in really, really big trouble legally or with appeals. If you have a candidate who says, I appeal this decision because you don't explain how you set your cut score. I don't know if psychometrician's taking a test, but certainly in the courts, certainly if you're using the test for any sort of professional development or progress, upward movement in the workforce, the cut score has to be able to be justified.
So if let's say you were a small organization launching a test for the first time, a program for the first time, you're going to go out there with one or two, a few forms just in the kind of early days. So you've got space for research.
Probably two.
Yeah.
Yep.
You would say Angoff, get the SMEs together, do an Angoff review. That would be the best approach because you're not going to have any reliable enough data to do anything else. As it grows, you might want to consider, you could loop in equating into the process because that might help you, I suppose, validate the SMEs. I call them SMEs.
Yeah,
you call them SMEs. Potatoes.
Yeah, I would use, if they're able to collect the pilot data, I look at it more at an item level,
Yeah.
just to check what the SMEs are doing on their rating level, not necessarily to go ahead and fully equate the forms. That would be like using the whole test level as a whole, but looking at it at an item level, just to be able to say, hey, these 3 items, you guys rated these as being really, really easy, but guess what? The pilot data said that it's actually really hard. Can you take another look at this? That's literally what I would do with that data. And some people approach it differently.
Yeah.
But again, it's, I think one example that I like to use is is a 3rd grader. If you picture an 8-year-old kid and you want to know if they're good at math. So you want to give them the label of good, great, or bad.
Yep.
Right. So you decide, I'm going to give them a test. They're 8 years old. And on this test, I'm going to have addition and subtraction. And to be good at math, I think that they should get a 70 on this test that has addition and subtraction because they're 8 years old. But let's say I change some of the tests and I make the test harder, either by accident or on purpose or whatever. And I put some fractions on there, maybe a couple simple algebra equations. All of a sudden, that 8-year-old, to be good at math, if he gets a 70 on that test, that's really, really impressive. Maybe I'm actually only going to look at him to get a 30 or a 40 on that test.
Yeah.
So that's how you take into consideration your test taker and the content of the test. And that's a very, very, very simple explanation. You can't just change some questions and be like, oh, I think we made it harder, so let's bump up the cut score. There's a mathematical way to do it. But that is a basic example that usually helps people understand why it has to change. And if you make some item edits and you're changing those items, and you put 10 new different items on the test, you need to make sure that your cut score still holds.
Yeah.
Because it goes with fairness. Now the people who are taking the test with the 10 new items, is it still fair? Is it still equivalent to when they took it before? So there's a lot of questions that go into it and why it has to be done properly. And people just don't think about it. They're like, well, you just 70 is passing.
I know what you mean. It's like a kind of, it's like ingrained in us, isn't it? That we're almost saying that automatically 69% of the people are failures and those kind of things,
Yes.
aren't we?
Yeah.
Regardless of the, if you look at it, regardless of the population that you've got present in front of you, you just can't make that decision because you could be grossly unfair, or you could be dangerously over generous on that, couldn't you?
Correct. If you're talking about certifying in the public safety space, with which most of our clients are, we sort of like to specialize in public safety, whether it's trades or regulation. You're talking about some dire consequences if some people get certified who should not be certified, who don't have the knowledge. So it's a really, it's a fine line that you walk in between it to make sure that the items are good. And you can do everything correctly. You can do a JTA, you can write great items, and we've seen this. And then they still always just have a 70. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're setting your cut score on. And the other thing is that if you have, let's say, we get this a lot too when we start working with a new client, if their cut score has been 70 forever, and they want to do things correctly, either they want to get accredited or they just want to be good and not be legally in trouble, then we can build the 2 forms so that they have a 70 cut score, because we can take the Angoffs, the ratings that we have from our subject matter experts, and we can play around with the items as long as they map to the blueprint, which we talked about from the JTA.
Yeah.
And we can build them approximately. There might be some overlap, but that's okay. But build them so that they come out to be about a 70 or an 80 or whatever. So you can sort of maintain that kind of PR thing, because it's really difficult to explain to your candidates that the test they're taking now is a 78 cut score. And they're going to be like, it's not fair. You made the test harder, right?
Yeah.
Because my friend took it last year and the cut score was 70.
Yeah.
This is if you even did give them the cut score. You don't have to give it to them. But that's hard for them to understand. And I get that. And so we can try our best to really kind of get as close as we can to where it is now, so they can keep that continuous.
Should you always give the cut score though? Do you think that should be, is that fairly standard practice? Or
I don't think that you should get, Standard practice. I think it depends. It depends on the industry. I find that more, how do I put it? Academic industries or more job roles, more industries that require more education, those people always want to know the cut score. They always want to know how close they are. But you open yourself up to a lot of complaints if you give out the cut score and you give out their final score, because if they miss it by 1 or 2 points, they're going to say, well, this question, this question, this question. So if you want to give out your cut score, fine, but we recommend you don't ever give out their final score. You want to give out a results page that looks like, in this domain, you got this % correct. In this domain, you got this % correct. And that way, if they fail, they know where they need to study. But there's really no reason to give them their exact score. And as far as releasing the cut score, you can do it if it's historically been done and you think people are going to think something shady is going to go on. But it's like a PR marketing question. And I also think you set yourself up a little bit, because when you release a new form or when you do another JTA and things change and the cut score has to change just because we can't get it to be exactly the same, you then have to explain that.
Yeah.
So if you can, I would keep it to yourself, but it's definitely not, a lot of people release it because their people demand it, sort of. So.
And a slight practical question, I suppose. And I think I know the answer to this one, but it'd be good to know confirmation on this.
Can I make you guess first? Can I make you guess?
Let's say I had several domains within my within my assessment that, and some were more important than others. Obviously, the total is going to add up to the score, and I'm going to get that cut score. How would I handle that? Is that weighting of the items? Do you think?
The weighting's already done because of the blueprint. Right. So your items are you already have 22 items about this, but you only have 11 items about this. So therefore, the first domain is weighted double than the second domain. It's weighted by content. But if you wanted to start weighting your items and you want to make some items worth more points than the others, you can certainly do that. It becomes really fun for your psychometrician to do that scoring, but you would need to be able to defend it. Why are you doing that? I see that a lot in performance-based tests, that are not multiple choice, where they're performing a task. And you're not going to have them do that task 16 times, even though it needs to be weighted 16% or whatever. So we will scale the points to help with the weighting rather than make them just repeat something over and over and over again. Or break it down into smaller pieces so that you can grade more points on more steps of that task. But there's different ways of doing it. But when you have the blueprint, that's why the blueprint's really important also, because that's where it all affects the weighting of the score. So.
Excellent. That's good to know.
So did you know the answer?
I was thinking about that. Well, it's probably because I'm slightly more in that performance domain. Performance testing domain, that I was thinking the weighting would have been the right, but I kind of see what you mean by you just ask more questions about it. I suppose in my head I had, let's say flying a plane was the test, and you definitely want to weight more towards landing, because if you're up there and you're flying steady, then you definitely want to get it down on the ground. Next level would be the next level domain would be the takeoff. Because you don't want to crash on takeoff, but then flying the plane, kind of you're up there.
Just turn it on. It's fine.
You're on autopilot. That's all I was kind of thinking. Within a subject, there's going to be different parts of that process which are slightly more important.
And those
that down on the ground is most important.
This ties back to the JTA, like that importance comes out of that JTA workshop and that survey process and that blueprint. And that's where, and when they leave the exam, they should feel like that was a good representation, both in proportion and difficulty of what the job role is. I mean, you want them to feel like, that was good. Or if it's an educational assessment, you don't want them to think there were 52 questions about something that was on 2 pages out of the 600 that I read.
Yeah.
That's not, so there's that weighting is really important, and people tend to not really think about that until they get into proper exam development.
So you mentioned about using Angoff. Should you always use Angoff in every situation?
That depends, shockingly, on what area, what's the goal of the assessment. So if it is based on the textbook or based on training materials, you can still use SMEs. You can still do sort of an Angoff. You can use what's called the bookmark method. That's kind of old school. Hofstee, which I've never actually used in practice, but you can Google any of these things and look them up. There's citations in the back of the book. And then there's, again, like I said, you're sort of setting a cut score if you're doing equating. You're sort of setting those equivalent forms if you're using the operational data that's out there. So it's not really setting a cut score, you're equating, but it's the same process, or it's the same outcome. Like a linear transformation of scores. So not always linear either, but making a lot of caveats in this discussion. I would say 95% of the time in certification licensure, we use Angoff. In pre-employment testing, where I used to work in that area, we did a lot of norm reference scores. Everything was norm referenced because the job role, a Target or a Starbucks or whatever, they would be doing some sort of fast screening tool on some sort of cognitive ability, like a low, like detail orientation or deductive reasoning or whatever. And they would want to take the top third of the people, and then they would move them on to an interview phase, or move them on to, you've passed this stage, upload your resume or whatever. So that's norm referenced. So there's lots of different ways of making that decision. But I would say in my world now, Angoff is by far the most common. Yeah.
So describe to me then your dream process for arriving at that cut score. Well, just kind of.
I get SMEs who do their homework and who do what they're supposed to do. SME herding is one of our biggest hurdles lots of times. I guess my dream process would be that we do a full Angoff process with a good panel of SMEs, but I do have some of that operational, that beta data on those items to back up what they're saying, or to be able to say, yeah, you guys are a little bit off. Is there a reason that they're off? And so them being off doesn't make them wrong, but they might say, if everybody's getting this question wrong, we don't care. This is something that should be basic knowledge, and everybody should know this, and it needs to have a higher difficulty level. They are the ones who are the experts. They are the ones who know what the standard is that is trying to be set by the certification exam. So they're the ones that get to set it at the end of the day. But we can use that operational data as a check. Like, hey guys, let's make sure that you're not, because it's hard when you're a subject matter expert and you're trying to imagine being either entry level or minimal competence, not somebody necessarily with 20 years of experience. You have to put yourself in their shoes.
Is that an imagine? So in when you're picturing that minimum competent person, is that an imagination process, or is that? Are they working off something?
We spend a lot of time coming up with that imaginary person. Sometimes we even make a little cartoon character, depending on who the client is, if we think that they'll like that or not. We have a little bit of fun with it.
Types. You do like persona type stuff on them.
Yep. Just to be able to give them an example, or if we have SMEs that we've worked with before and they've done it before, they will say to their colleagues, this is who I imagine. And it's this person, not individual names, but so they can always help with that too. But that's a really important thing, because if they don't think about that properly, the minimal competence, then their ratings are way off.
And do you find sometimes that they're looking at it almost like they're trying to reflect themselves, who is an expert in that role, and they're ignoring?
Or they do what should be right. Well, they should know that. Okay, but think about them. If they're just out of college or they're just out of trade school, are they going to know that? Do you expect somebody who's just out of trade school walking onto the job site to know this? And they're like, well, yeah, I guess not, but they should. Okay, well, they should after 5 years. So if we do a mastery certification or level 2 or level 3, and we ask a similar question about the same kind of topic, then that difficulty level might change. But for these entry level guys, what should it be? So we have that conversation a lot.
Awesome. And I think you mentioned this earlier. Obviously, you've created tests, you've had it out there. You make some tweaks to the items of the test because of some performance data you're seeing. Do you ignore then going back through the process of changing our cut score, or do you?
No, you need to do it. Well, and here's the thing about storing those Angoff ratings. They should be stored with your metadata with your items, right? So you keep track of those Angoff ratings. So if this item is at a 72, and you know that you're going to replace it, and you get the new, let's say you have a group of like 20 new items that you need to put on the form, you get them Angoffed. It's not a verb, but we've made it into one. Americans tend to do that, right? We Angoffed it. And so now this other item has a Angoff of 73 or 74. It's really close to the 72. We can probably swap that out and it won't change overall the cut score. But if a bunch of those we're swapping out and those new Angoffs make the cut score very different, you have to change your cut score. Yeah. It's just like if I was going to add algebra to my little subtractions and addition test, I would need to change what I expect that third grader to be able to do. So you just have to be careful. Sometimes you don't have to change it if you're only making small little tweaks. But if you're replacing items, you need to pay attention to that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think, is there anything else you think you've not covered today that you think someone needs to know about cut scores right now? Or do you think we've covered it all?
I think I've covered it all, but I also think we will hang up and just like last week, I will say, oh crap, I forgot this. So we just tune in next time to find out. It's like a teaser, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, join us next week for what we've missed in this week. Perfect. And
join us next week for Amanda's airheaded additions to last week's podcast. Yeah.
And of course, if you're playing the It Depends drinking game, you've probably passed out about 20 minutes ago.
Yes, we do need to do that at a conference. I think that would be really fun to do that.
I think it'd be awesome. I really like to do that. But I kind of like the idea of adding the It Depends references to the score for the podcast. So each episode has a score for the It Depends. I think that'd be a nice little
How many times? I don't think I said it as many times this time as I did for the JTA.
I don't know. We'll listen back through and we'll top those up for you. I'm sure someone will dial in with a response there as well. But that's perfect. As ever, thank you, Amanda. You the way you explain things is super easy for everyone out there who isn't necessarily an expert, because you do a fantastic job of bridging the expertise and the common language with that. So
I've had years of practice, and I used to teach statistics to guidance school counselors who were in master's level programs, and so I think I chalk up that skill to learning it during that war zone that I was in, trying to teach statistics to them. So it was a lot of fun, but I had to really learn how to teach things by saying things in a million different ways and seeing which way worked. So lots of experience doing that. But great podcast as usual. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, and stay tuned and look forward to listening to everyone and talking to you next time. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.